Chapter 1: Functional Organization of the Human Body and Control of the Internal Environment. Physiology is the science that seeks to explain the physical and chemical mechanisms that are responsible for the origin, development, and progression of life. Each type of life, from the simplest virus to the largest tree or the complicated human being, has its own functional characteristics. Therefore, the vast field of physiology can be divided into viral physiology, bacterial physiology, cellular physiology, plant physiology, invertebrate physiology, vertebrate physiology, mammalian physiology, human physiology, and many more. Human physiology. The science of human physiology attempts to explain the specific characteristics and mechanisms of the human body that make it a living being. The fact that we remain alive is the result of complex control systems. Hunger makes us seek food, and fear makes us seek refuge. Sensations of cold make us look for warmth. Other forces cause us to seek fellowship and to reproduce. The fact that we are sensing, feeling, and knowledgeable beings is part of this automatic sequence of life. These special attributes allow us to exist under widely varying conditions that otherwise would make life impossible. Human physiology links the basic sciences with medicine and integrates multiple functions of the cells, tissues, and organs into the functions of the living human being. This integration requires communication and coordination by a vast array of control systems that operate at every level, from the genes that program synthesis of molecules to the complex nervous and hormonal systems that coordinate functions of cells, tissues, and organs throughout the body. Thus, the coordinated functions of the human body are much more than the sum of its parts, and life in health, as well as in disease states, relies on this total function. Although the main focus of this book is on normal human physiology, we will also discuss, to some extent, pathophysiology, which is the study of disordered body function and the basis for clinical medicine. Cells are the living units of the body. The basic living unit of the body is the cell. Each tissue or organ is an aggregate of many different cells held together by intercellular supporting structures. Each type of cell is specially adapted to perform one or a few particular functions. For example, the red blood cells, numbering about 25 trillion in each person, transport oxygen from the lungs to the tissues. Although the red blood cells are the most abundant of any single type of cell in the body, there are also trillions of additional cells of other types that perform functions different from those of the red blood cell. The entire body, then, contains about 35 to 40 trillion human cells. The many cells of the body often differ markedly from one another, but all have certain basic characteristics that are alike. For example, oxygen reacts with carbohydrate, fat, and protein to release the energy required for all cells to function. Furthermore, the general chemical mechanisms for changing nutrients into energy are basically the same in all cells, and all cells deliver products of their chemical reactions into the surrounding fluids. Almost all cells also have the ability to reproduce additional cells of their own type. Fortunately, when cells of a particular type are destroyed, the remaining cells of this type usually generate new cells until the supply is replenished. Microorganisms living in the body outnumber human cells. In addition to human cells, trillions of microbes inhabit the body, living on the skin and in the mouth, gut, and nose. The gastrointestinal tract, for example, normally contains a complex and dynamic population of 400 to 1,000 species of microorganisms that outnumber our human cells. Communities of microorganisms that inhabit the body, often called microbiota, can cause diseases. But most of the time they live in harmony with their human hosts and provide vital functions that are essential for survival of their hosts. Although the importance of gut microbiota in the digestion of foodstuffs is widely recognized, additional roles for the body's microbes in nutrition, immunity, and other functions are just beginning to be appreciated and represent an intensive area of biomedical research. Extracellular fluid. The internal environment. About 50% to 70% of the adult human body is fluid, mainly a water solution of ions and other substances. Most of this fluid is inside the cells and is called intracellular fluid. About 1/3 is in the spaces outside the cells and is called extracellular fluid. This extracellular fluid is in constant motion throughout the body. It is transported rapidly in the circulating blood and then mixed between the blood and tissue fluids by diffusion through the capillary walls. In the extracellular fluid are the ions and nutrients needed by the cells to maintain life. Thus, all cells live in essentially the same environment, the extracellular fluid. For this reason, the extracellular fluid is also called the internal environment of the body, or the milieu intérieur, a term introduced by the great 19th century French physiologist Claude Bernard. Cells are capable of living and performing their special functions as long as the proper concentrations of oxygen, glucose, different ions, amino acids, fatty substances, and other constituents are available in this internal environment. Differences in extracellular and intracellular fluids. The extracellular fluid contains large amounts of sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate ions plus nutrients for the cells, such as oxygen, glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. It also contains carbon dioxide that is being transported from the cells to the lungs to be excreted, plus other cellular waste products that are being transported to the kidneys for excretion. The intracellular fluid contains large amounts of potassium, magnesium, and phosphate ions instead of the sodium and chloride ions found in the extracellular fluid. Special mechanisms for transporting ions through the cell membranes maintain the ion concentration differences between the extracellular and intracellular fluids. These transport processes are discussed in Chapter 4. Homeostasis, maintenance of a nearly constant internal environment. In 1929, the American physiologist Walter Cannon coined the term homeostasis to describe the maintenance of nearly constant conditions in the internal environment. Essentially, all organs and tissues of the body perform functions that help maintain these relatively constant conditions. For example, the lungs provide oxygen to the extracellular fluid to replenish the oxygen used by the cells, the kidneys maintain constant ion concentrations, and the gastrointestinal system provides nutrients while eliminating waste from the body. The various ions, nutrients, waste products, and other constituents of the body are normally regulated within a range of values, rather than at fixed values. For some of the body's constituents, this range is extremely small. Variations in the blood hydrogen ion concentration, for example, are normally less than 5 nanomoles/L. The blood sodium concentration is also tightly regulated, normally varying only a few millimoles per liter, even with large changes in sodium intake, but these variations of sodium concentration are at least 1 million times greater than for hydrogen ions. Powerful control systems exist for maintaining concentrations of sodium and hydrogen ions, as well as for most of the other ions, nutrients, and substances in the body at levels that permit the cells, tissues, and organs to perform their normal functions, despite wide environmental variations and challenges from injury and diseases. Much of this text is concerned with how each organ or tissue contributes to homeostasis. Normal body functions require integrated actions of cells, tissues, organs, and multiple nervous, hormonal, and local control systems that together contribute to homeostasis and good health. Homeostatic compensations in diseases. Disease is often considered to be a state of disrupted homeostasis. However, even in the presence of disease, homeostatic mechanisms continue to operate and maintain vital functions through multiple compensations. In some cases, these compensations may lead to major deviations of the body's functions from the normal range, making it difficult to distinguish the primary cause of the disease from the compensatory responses. For example, diseases that impair the kidney's ability to excrete salt and water may lead to high blood pressure, which initially helps return excretion to normal so that a balance between intake and renal excretion can be maintained. This balance is needed to maintain life, but, over long periods of time, the high blood pressure can damage various organs, including the kidneys, causing even greater increases in blood pressure and more renal damage. Thus, homeostatic compensations that ensue after injury, disease, or major environmental challenges to the body may represent trade-offs that are necessary to maintain vital body functions but, in the long term, contribute to additional abnormalities of body function. The discipline of pathophysiology seeks to explain how the various physiological processes are altered in diseases or injury. This chapter outlines the different functional systems of the body and their contributions to homeostasis. We then briefly discuss the basic theory of the body's control systems that allow the functional systems to operate in support of one another. Extracellular fluid transport and mixing system. The blood circulatory system. Extracellular fluid is transported through the body in two stages. The first stage is movement of blood through the body in the blood vessels. The second is movement of fluid between the blood capillaries and the intercellular spaces between the tissue cells. Figure 1:1 shows the overall circulation of blood. All the blood in the circulation traverses the entire circuit and average unit I of once each minute when the body is at rest and as many as 6 times each minute when a person is extremely active. As blood passes through blood capillaries, continual exchange of extracellular fluid occurs between the plasma portion of the blood and the interstitial fluid that fills the intercellular spaces. This process is shown in figure 1:2. The capillary walls are permeable to most molecules in the blood plasma, with the exception of plasma proteins, which are too large to pass through capillaries readily. Therefore, large amounts of fluid and its dissolved constituents diffuse back and forth between the blood and the tissue spaces, as shown by the arrows in figure 1:2. This process of diffusion is caused by kinetic motion of the molecules in the plasma and the interstitial fluid. That is, the fluid and dissolved molecules are continually moving and bouncing in all directions in the plasma and fluid in the intercellular spaces, as well as through capillary pores. Few cells are located more than 50 micrometers from a capillary, which ensures diffusion of almost any substance from the capillary to the cell within a few seconds. Thus, the extracellular fluid everywhere in the body, both that of the plasma and that of the interstitial fluid, is continually being mixed, thereby maintaining homogeneity of extracellular fluid throughout the body. Origin of nutrients in the extracellular fluid. Respiratory system. Figure 1:1 shows that each time blood passes through the body, it also flows through the lungs. The blood picks up oxygen in alveoli, thus acquiring the oxygen needed by cells. The membrane between the alveoli and the lumen of the pulmonary capillaries, the alveolar membrane, is only 0.4 to 2.0 micrometers thick, and oxygen rapidly diffuses by molecular motion through this membrane into the blood. Gastrointestinal tract. A large portion of the blood pumped by the heart also passes through the walls of the gastrointestinal tract. Here different dissolved nutrients, including carbohydrates, fatty acids, and amino acids, are absorbed from ingested food into the extracellular fluid of the blood. Liver and other organs that perform primarily metabolic functions. Not all substances absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract can be used in their absorbed form by the cells. The liver changes the chemical compositions of many of these substances to more usable forms, and other tissues of the body, fat cells, gastrointestinal mucosa, kidneys, and endocrine glands help modify the absorbed substances or store them until they are needed. The liver also eliminates certain waste products produced in the body and toxic substances that are ingested. Lungs. Musculoskeletal system. How does the musculoskeletal system contribute to homeostasis? The answer is obvious and simple. Were it not for the muscles, the body could not move to obtain the foods required for nutrition. The musculoskeletal system also provides motility for protection against adverse surroundings, without which the entire body, along with its homeostatic mechanisms, could be destroyed. Removal of metabolic end products. Removal of carbon dioxide by the lungs. At the same time that blood picks up oxygen in the lungs, carbon dioxide is released from the blood into lung alveoli, the respiratory movement of air into and out of the lungs carries carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is the most abundant of all the metabolism products. Kidneys. Passage of blood through the kidneys removes most of the other substances from the plasma besides carbon dioxide that are not needed by cells. These substances include different end products of cellular metabolism, such as urea and uric acid. They also include excesses of ions and water from the food that accumulate in the extracellular fluid. The kidneys perform their function first by filtering large quantities of plasma through the glomerular capillaries into the tubules and then reabsorbing into the blood substances needed by the body, such as glucose, amino acids, appropriate amounts of water, and many other items. Most of the other substances that are not needed by the body, especially metabolic waste products such as urea and creatinine, are reabsorbed poorly and pass through the renal tubules into the urine. Gastrointestinal tract. Undigested material that enters the gastrointestinal tract and some waste products of metabolism are eliminated in the feces. Liver. Among the many functions of the liver is detoxification or removal of ingested drugs and chemicals. The liver secretes many of these wastes into the bile to be eventually eliminated in the feces. Regulation of body functions. Nervous system. The nervous system is composed of three major parts: the sensory input portion, the central nervous system, and the motor output portion. Sensory receptors detect the state of the body and its surroundings. For example, receptors in the skin alert us whenever an object touches the skin. The eyes are sensory organs that give us a visual image of the surrounding area. The ears are also sensory organs. The central nervous system is composed of the brain and spinal cord. The brain stores information, generates thoughts, creates ambition, and determines reactions that the body performs in response to the sensations. Appropriate signals are then transmitted through the motor output portion of the nervous system to carry out one's desires. An important segment of the nervous system is called the autonomic system. It operates at a subconscious level and controls many functions of internal organs, including the level of pumping activity by the heart, movements of the gastrointestinal tract, and secretion by many of the body's glands. Hormone systems. Located in the body are endocrine glands, organs, and tissues that secrete chemical substances called hormones. Hormones are transported in the extracellular fluid to other parts of the body to help regulate cellular function. Insulin controls glucose metabolism, adrenocortical hormones control sodium and potassium ions and protein metabolism, and parathyroid hormone controls bone calcium and phosphate. Thus, the hormones provide a regulatory system that complements the nervous system. The nervous system controls many muscular and secretory activities of the body, whereas the hormonal system regulates many metabolic functions. The nervous and hormonal systems normally work together in a coordinated manner to control essentially all the organ systems of the body. Protection of the body. Immune system. The immune system includes white blood cells, tissue cells derived from white blood cells, the thymus, lymph nodes, and lymph vessels that protect the body from pathogens such as bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. The immune system provides a mechanism for the body to carry out the following: distinguish its own cells from harmful foreign cells and substances, and destroy the invader by phagocytosis or by producing sensitized lymphocytes or specialized proteins that destroy or neutralize the invader. Integumentary system. The skin and its various appendages cover, cushion, and protect the deeper tissues and organs of the body and generally provide a boundary between the body's internal environment and the outside world. The integumentary system is also important for temperature regulation and excretion of wastes, and it provides a sensory interface between the body and the external environment. The skin generally comprises about 12% to 15% of body weight. Reproduction. Although reproduction is sometimes not considered a homeostatic function, it helps maintain homeostasis by generating new beings to take the place of those that are dying. This may sound like a permissive usage of the term homeostasis, but it illustrates that in the final analysis, essentially all body structures are organized to help maintain the automaticity and continuity of life. Control systems of the body. The human body has thousands of control systems. Some of the most intricate of these systems are genetic control systems that operate in all cells to help regulate intracellular and extracellular functions. This subject is discussed in Chapter 3. Many other control systems operate within the organs to regulate functions of the individual parts of the organs. Others operate throughout the entire body to control the interrelationships between the organs. For example, the respiratory system, operating in association with the nervous system, regulates the concentration of carbon dioxide in the extracellular fluid. The liver and pancreas control glucose concentration in the extracellular fluid, and the kidneys regulate concentrations of hydrogen, sodium, potassium, phosphate, and other ions in the extracellular fluid. Examples of control mechanisms: regulation of oxygen and carbon dioxide concentrations in the extracellular fluid. Because oxygen is one of the major substances required for chemical reactions in cells, the body has a special control mechanism to maintain an almost exact and constant oxygen concentration in the extracellular fluid. This mechanism depends principally on the chemical characteristics of hemoglobin, which is present in red blood cells. Hemoglobin combines with oxygen as the blood passes through the lungs. Then, as the blood passes through the tissue capillaries, hemoglobin, because of its own strong chemical affinity for oxygen, does not release oxygen into the tissue fluid if too much oxygen is already there. However, if oxygen concentration in the tissue fluid is too low, sufficient oxygen is released to re-establish an adequate concentration. Thus, regulation of oxygen concentration in the tissues relies to a great extent on the chemical characteristics of hemoglobin. This regulation is called the oxygen buffering function of hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide concentration in the extracellular fluid is regulated in a much different way. Carbon dioxide is a major end product of oxidative reactions in cells. If all the carbon dioxide formed in the cells continued to accumulate in the tissue fluids, all energy-giving reactions of the cells would cease. Fortunately, a higher than normal carbon dioxide concentration in the blood excites the respiratory center, causing a person to breathe rapidly and deeply. This deep rapid breathing increases expiration of carbon dioxide and, therefore, removes excess carbon dioxide from the blood and tissue fluids. This process continues until the concentration returns to normal. Regulation of arterial blood pressure. Several systems contribute to arterial blood pressure regulation. One of these, the baroreceptor system, is an excellent example of a rapidly acting control mechanism. In the walls of the bifurcation region of the carotid arteries in the neck, and also in the arch of the aorta in the thorax, are many nerve receptors called baroreceptors that are stimulated by stretch of the arterial wall. When arterial pressure rises too high, the baroreceptors send barrages of nerve impulses to the medulla of the brain. Here, these impulses inhibit the vasomotor center, which in turn decreases the number of impulses transmitted from the vasomotor center through the sympathetic nervous system to the heart and blood vessels. Lack of these impulses causes diminished pumping activity by the heart and dilation of peripheral blood vessels, allowing increased blood flow through the vessels. Both these effects decrease the arterial pressure, moving it back toward normal. Conversely, a decrease in arterial pressure below normal relaxes the stretch receptors, allowing the vasomotor center to become more active than usual, thereby causing vasoconstriction and increased heart pumping. The initial decrease in arterial pressure thus initiates negative feedback mechanisms that raise arterial pressure back toward normal. Normal ranges and physical characteristics of important extracellular fluid constituents. Table 1:1 lists some important constituents and physical characteristics of extracellular fluid, along with their normal values, normal ranges, and maximum limits without causing death. Note the narrowness of the normal range for each one. Values outside these ranges are often caused by illness, injury, or major environmental challenges. Most important are the limits beyond which abnormalities can cause death. For example, an increase in the body temperature of only 11 degrees Fahrenheit above normal can lead to a vicious cycle of increasing cellular metabolism that destroys the cells. Note also the narrow range for acid-base balance in the body, with the normal pH value of 7.4 and lethal values only about 0.5 on either side of normal. Whenever the potassium ion concentration decreases to less than 1/3 normal, paralysis may result from the inability of the nerves to carry signals. Alternatively, if potassium ion concentration increases to 2 or more times normal, the heart muscle is likely to be severely depressed. Also, when the calcium ion concentration falls below about 1/2 normal, a person is likely to experience tetanic contraction of muscles throughout the body because of the spontaneous generation of excess nerve impulses in peripheral nerves. When the glucose concentration falls below 1/2 normal, a person frequently exhibits extreme mental irritability and sometimes even has convulsions. These examples should give one an appreciation for the necessity of the vast numbers of control systems that keep the body operating in health. In the absence of any one of these controls, serious body malfunction or death can result. Characteristics of control systems. The aforementioned examples of homeostatic control mechanisms are only a few of the many thousands in the body, all of which have some common characteristics, as explained in this section. Negative feedback nature of most control systems. Most control systems of the body act by negative feedback, which can be explained by reviewing some of the homeostatic control systems mentioned previously. In the regulation of carbon dioxide concentration, a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the extracellular fluid increases pulmonary ventilation. This, in turn, decreases the extracellular fluid carbon dioxide concentration because the lungs expire greater amounts of carbon dioxide from the body. Thus, the high concentration of carbon dioxide initiates events that decrease the concentration toward normal, which is negative to the initiating stimulus. Conversely, a carbon dioxide concentration that falls too low results in feedback to increase the concentration. This response is also negative to the initiating stimulus. In the arterial pressure regulating mechanisms, a high pressure causes a series of reactions that promote reduced pressure, or a low pressure causes a series of reactions that promote increased pressure. In both cases, these effects are negative with respect to the initiating stimulus. Therefore, in general, if some factor becomes excessive or deficient, a control system initiates negative feedback, which consists of a series of changes that return the factor toward a certain mean value, thus maintaining homeostasis. Gain of a control system. The degree of effectiveness with which a control system maintains constant conditions is determined by the gain of negative feedback. For example, let us assume that a large volume of blood is transfused into a person whose baroreceptor pressure control system is not functioning, and the arterial pressure rises from the normal level of 100 mm Hg up to 175 mm Hg. Then, let us assume that the same volume of blood is injected into the same person when the baroreceptor system is functioning, and this time the pressure increases by only 25 mm Hg. Thus, the feedback control system has caused a correction of 50 mm Hg, from 175 mm Hg to 125 mm Hg. There remains an increase in pressure of plus 25 mm Hg, called the error, which means that the control system is not 100% effective in preventing change. The gain of the system is then calculated by using the following formula. Gain equals correction error. Thus, in the baroreceptor system example, the correction is 50 mm Hg, and the error persisting is plus 25 mm Hg. Therefore, the gain of the person's baroreceptor system. For control of arterial pressure is 50 divided by plus 25, or 2. That is, a disturbance that increases or decreases the arterial pressure does so only 1/3 as much as would occur if this control system were not present. The gains of some other physiological control systems are much greater than that of the baroreceptor system. For example, the gain of the system controlling internal body temperature when a person is exposed to moderately cold weather is about 33. Therefore, one can see that the temperature control system is much more effective than the baroreceptor pressure control system. Positive feedback may cause vicious cycles and death. Why do most control systems of the body operate by negative feedback rather than by positive feedback? If one considers the nature of positive feedback, it is obvious that positive feedback leads to instability rather than stability and, in some cases, can cause death. Figure 1-4 shows an example in which death can ensue from positive feedback. This figure depicts the pumping effectiveness of the heart, showing the heart of a healthy human pumping about 5 liters of blood per minute. If the person suddenly bleeds a total of 2 liters, the amount of blood in the body is decreased to such a low level that not enough blood is available for the heart to pump effectively. As a result, the arterial pressure falls, and the flow of blood to the heart muscle through the coronary vessels diminishes. This scenario results in weakening of the heart, further diminished pumping, a further decrease in coronary blood flow, and still more weakness of the heart. The cycle repeats itself again and again until death occurs. Note that each cycle in the feedback results in further weakening of the heart. In other words, the initiating stimulus causes more of the same, which is positive feedback. Positive feedback is sometimes known as a vicious cycle, but a mild degree of positive feedback can be overcome by the negative feedback control mechanisms of the body, and the vicious cycle then fails to develop. For example, if the person in the aforementioned example bleeds only 1 liter instead of 2 liters, the normal negative feedback mechanisms for controlling cardiac output and arterial pressure can counterbalance the positive feedback and the person can recover, as shown by the dashed curve of figure 1-4. Positive feedback can sometimes be useful. The body sometimes uses positive feedback to its advantage. Blood clotting is an example of a valuable use of positive feedback. When a blood vessel is ruptured, and a clot begins to form, multiple enzymes called clotting factors are activated within the clot. Some of these enzymes act on other inactivated enzymes of the immediately adjacent blood, thus causing more blood clotting. This process continues until the hole in the vessel is plugged and bleeding no longer occurs. On occasion, this mechanism can get out of hand and cause formation of unwanted clots. In fact, this is what initiates most acute heart attacks, which can be caused by a clot beginning on the inside surface of an atherosclerotic plaque in a coronary artery and then growing until the artery is blocked. Childbirth is another situation in which positive feedback is valuable. When uterine contractions become strong enough for the baby's head to begin pushing through the cervix, stretching of the cervix sends signals through the uterine muscle back to the body of the uterus, causing even more powerful contractions. Thus, the uterine contractions stretch the cervix, and cervical stretch causes stronger contractions. When this process becomes powerful enough, the baby is born. If they are not powerful enough, the contractions usually die out, and a few days pass before they begin again. Another important use of positive feedback is for the generation of nerve signals. Stimulation of the membrane of a nerve fiber causes slight leakage of sodium ions through sodium channels in the nerve membrane to the fiber's interior. The sodium ions entering the fiber then change the membrane potential, which, in turn, causes more opening of channels, more change of potential, still more opening of channels, and so forth. Thus, a slight leak becomes an explosion of sodium entering the interior of the nerve fiber, which creates the nerve action potential. This action potential, in turn, causes electrical current to flow along the outside and inside of the fiber and initiates additional action potentials. This process continues until the nerve signal goes all the way to the end of the fiber. In each case in which positive feedback is useful, the positive feedback is part of an overall negative feedback process. For example, in the case of blood clotting, the positive feedback clotting process is a negative feedback process for the maintenance of normal blood volume. Also, the positive feedback that causes nerve signals allows the nerves to participate in thousands of negative feedback nervous control systems. More complex types of control systems feed forward and adaptive control. Later in this text, when we study the nervous system, we shall see that this system contains great numbers of interconnected control mechanisms. Some are simple feedback systems similar to those already discussed. Many are not. For example, some movements of the body occur so rapidly that there is not enough time for nerve signals to travel from the peripheral parts of the body all the way to the brain and then back to the periphery again to control the movement. Therefore, the brain uses a mechanism called feed-forward control to cause required muscle contractions. Sensory nerve signals from the moving parts apprise the brain about whether the movement is performed correctly. If not, the brain corrects the feed-forward signals that it sends to the muscles the next time the movement is required. Then, if still further correction is necessary, this process will be performed again for subsequent movements. This process is called adaptive control. Adaptive control, in a sense, is delayed negative feedback. Thus, one can see how complex the feedback control systems of the body can be. A person's life depends on all of them. Therefore, much of this text is devoted to discussing these life-giving mechanisms. Physiological variability. Although some physiological variables, such as plasma concentrations of potassium, calcium, and hydrogen ions, are tightly regulated, others, such as body weight and adiposity, show wide variation among different individuals and even in the same individual at different stages of life. Blood pressure, cardiac pumping, metabolic rate, nervous system activity, hormones, and other physiological variables change throughout the day as we move about and engage in normal daily activities. Therefore, when we discuss normal values, it is with the understanding that many of the body's control systems are constantly reacting to perturbations, and that variability may exist among different individuals. Depending on body weight and height, diet, age, sex, environment, genetics, and other factors. For simplicity, discussion of physiological functions often focuses on the average 70 kg young, lean male. However, the American male no longer weighs an average of 70 kilograms, he now weighs over 88 kilograms, and the average American female weighs over 76 kilograms, more than the average man in the 1960s. Body weight has also increased substantially in most other industrialized countries during the past 40 to 50 years. Except for reproductive and hormonal functions, many other physiological functions and normal values are often discussed in terms of male physiology. However, there are clearly differences in male and female physiology beyond the obvious differences that relate to reproduction. These differences can have important consequences for understanding normal physiology as well as for treatment of diseases. Age-related and ethnic or racial differences in physiology also have important influences on body composition, physiological control systems, and pathophysiology of diseases. For example, in a lean young male the total body water is about 60% of body weight. As a person grows and ages, this percentage gradually decreases, partly because aging is usually associated with declining skeletal muscle mass and increasing fat mass. Aging may also cause a decline in the function and effectiveness of some organs and physiological control systems. These sources of physiological variability, sex differences, aging, ethnic, and racial are complex but important considerations when discussing normal physiology and the pathophysiology of diseases. Summary: automaticity of the body. The main purpose of this chapter has been to discuss briefly the overall organization of the body and the means whereby the different parts of the body operate in harmony. To summarize, the body is actually a social order of about 35 to 40 trillion cells organized into different functional structures, some of which are called organs. Each functional structure contributes its share to the maintenance of homeostasis in the extracellular fluid, which is called the internal environment. As long as normal conditions are maintained in this internal environment, the cells of the body continue to live and function properly. Each cell benefits from homeostasis and, in turn, each cell contributes its share toward the maintenance of homeostasis. This reciprocal interplay provides continuous automaticity of the body until one or more functional systems lose their ability to contribute their share of function. When this happens, all the cells of the body suffer. Extreme dysfunction leads to death, moderate dysfunction leads to sickness.